Yeah. So, hi everyone. Thanks very much for your interest and for your participation in this final session. For those who don't know me yet, I am Patricia Burton. I work for the Brazilian Agricultural Research Corporation, also known as Embrapa, and I'm one of the IGAD co-chairs. We have the three co-chairs participating in this session now: Cynthia Parr from the USDA, Emma Subratz from FAO, and myself. Well, this is the final session to an event that, in our opinion was very successful. And we do have two topics to discuss today. These are the proposal of a community of practice in agriculture within RDA, and the idea of a new working group under the umbrella of IGAD, the Crop Data Interoperability Working Group. Now, the idea for this session is to have an informal discussion, a conversation, really. So if you want to ask something or speak up, you can do this anytime, okay? I would just ask you to raise your hand virtually so that we can organize all the talks and questions. Now, to bring some information and to animate the debate, we will have the participation of Françoise from RDA Technical Advisory Board and CGIAR also. Well, these are the main topics on the agenda, but you can propose different chat box. But before diving these very interesting themes, though I would like to maybe invite my friend Emma to provide us with a very short recap on this week's event, how many sessions we had, how many participants in total we had, and things like that. Is that okay, Emma?
Yes, it's okay. So very briefly, we had some 5 sessions, and with this one, we had 6. Let's say that we had more or less about 350 people attending the sessions, and we know that there was a big participation from Africa, Asia, and also Latin America that usually cannot attend when we have the IGAD meetings during the RDA plenary. So it was very good to give the opportunity to share experiences and lessons learned more broadly and widely than usual. We also have recorded the sessions, and we have collected the slides. We will not do it immediately. We will spend a little bit of time. It's quite time consuming to upload all these materials, so be patient. We will inform you as soon as are available through the RDA mailing list. So those that are not registered, please do. I hope that Chelsea or Ilkay will share through the chat, or also Patrizia or Cindy, where you will find a mailing list. So yes, in general terms, from our side, was quite smooth. We had some technical issues here and there with the bandwidth, but this is quite normal in all the meetings that are taking place in Zoom these days. So nothing but in particular to worry about. And yes, we have prepared a survey that we are going to distribute very soon. And we would appreciate very much if you can fill it, because we would like to understand whether we want to continue with IGAD's online meetings like this one, for instance, in the future, or you prefer that we switch off and we go back to face-to-face only, or a combination, or to get a little bit of guidance about what the community would be interested to do from now on after this huge event in terms of presentations at the same time, and also from the countries that we have received these presentations. And I think that's more or less, this is everything, Patricia. If there is still anything else, I will let you know during this call. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Ima. We did realize that many of the audience, many people in the audience, they are not very familiar with RDA yet, or maybe this is the first IGAD event that you participate in. So because of that, I will ask Cynthia to say a few words about IGAD, the creation of this interest group, what it represents, and how it has evolved since 2013 when it was created. Is that okay, Cynthia?
Now is when I confess that I forgot to prepare the slides that I said I would yesterday. So give me a few minutes and I will find some slides. But what I will say for now is that Egad has been around for quite a number of years and participated in many of the RDA plenaries. Typically, RDA has a special pre-meeting before the Research Data Alliance plenary where we have scheduled entire days of presentations. And this has been a great opportunity for people from all over the world to share their expertise. We have also, because we recognize that many people have not been able to travel to the RDA plenaries, we began last year doing a series of webinars so that people could see the same presentations that were presented physically so that they could see them virtually. And so we've had a webinar series going now for some numbers of months since the Finland meeting. And those are all available online as well, so people can watch them at any time. So what I think I might do is, while we start talking about this potential transition to a community of practice, I'll go dig up the slides that I said I would find to share some of the history, and we can perhaps come back to that after Françoise talks about the community of practice.
Yes. Would you like to add something to that, Ima? Hi, I think.
No, I will wait the slides that Cindy is going to prepare, and then I can add some stuff about my experience organizing events and so here in Egad.
All right, so maybe we could move on to, well, actually before that, does anyone have a question, something that would like to bring to the table? We are available to do that.
Or any feedback about what they thought about this week? That would be interesting as well, if you can share this now before the survey. But you don't have to. You can use the chat box if you like while we are talking, and if you want to leave a comment about what you liked or what you think that we could do better, or etc., etc. What you would like to see next, etc.
It seems Richard would like to talk, to ask something. Let me locate him, unmute him.
Okay, yeah, I'm muted.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, I think it's, I've not been in all the sessions, but I think it's gone very well actually this week. So I personally would like to see this continue. And I think it's been a lot more, as has just been said, a lot more inclusive, which is only a good thing. So yeah, I think it's worked very well. So well done to all of you who have been involved in making this happen.
Yeah. I think, yeah, it was great. I can speak from the perspective of someone who lives in Latin America, and it's not very easy to join all the plenaries, 2 plenaries every year. It's very expensive for us. And to me, this event was very special. We have very, very nice work being showcased during the week. And though the times for me, they are not great, but very well. Um, I guess we already have the slides on.
Yes, it was not hard for me to find them.
Okay.
Are people able to see my screen yet?
Yes, I can see.
Is it showing the presentation? Yes. Okay, so I don't have a lot to say. Just the first thing to point out is that we have an area on the Research Data Alliance website. I put the link in the chat. This is the area here on the left. There is also additional information on the AIMS site, so you can also go there for information, but pretty much we would like to steer you to the RDA information on the left. We post things in both places. The group has been around since the second RDA plenary. So here is a list of the plenaries that we've participated in through Helsinki. And then the most recent plenary in Australia was supposed to be in Australia, but instead of being there physically, since that meeting was not held, we participated virtually. So the group dates back to 2013, and I was not involved at that time. I believe, Emma, were you there? That far
No,
back?
I started in Amsterdam, 2014.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. So the group has typically been involved, at least in some way, in all the plenaries. But as I said, we have had special pre-meetings with our own agenda and symposia at some of them. And this slide deck has some links, but again, you can find all of these by going to the main RDA site. As part of the meeting that we held in Helsinki, we talked a lot about good practices in agriculture. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of those presentations were so excellent, we wanted to make sure that they reached a broader audience. And so we began the webinar series. I should also mention, and I don't have a slide for this, that we've had a number of working groups that have organized under the Egad umbrella. And one of the most successful was the Wheat Data Interoperability Group. We've had an ongoing agri-semantics working group that has published recommendations and is now in the process of implementation. We will continue to encourage and support the efforts of those working groups. But primarily to date, we have been an interest group that has had hundreds of members who have joined via the website. Not quite as many have participated in person. And so we did start doing these webinars. This is a somewhat old slide to indicate how many people actually joined some of these webinars and how many views we had as of the Helsinki meeting. One of the things that we could discuss later in today's session is whether we should continue with this webinar format and what we think of these virtual meetings, such as the one we've had this week, because the participation seems to be much greater in a virtual meeting that we're having now. So I think that's it. This again is an old slide. So I don't know, do we have any other webinars scheduled after this, Emma?
No, there is nothing.
Okay. Okay. So that's really all I wanted to say. The group has representation from many different continents. And as you have seen, we have 3 leaders of the group from 3 different continents, and that helps us carry the load and make sure that we can cover multiple time zones. And I think we represent one of the most successful domain-specific interest groups in the Research Data Alliance. And so with that, I think it's probably a good time to transition to Françoise to talk about the proposal that's now before us that we're helping to develop on establishing a new kind of group within RDA that would be called a community of practice. So,
yes. Cindy,
yes.
just before that, there are 2 comments in the chat box that I think are related to your talk. Well, the first one is from Karsten Hoffman, saying that virtual meetings do not replace totally physical meetings, but the IGAD chairs manage these virtual meetings in a very good way. Thanks for all the participants and the presenters. Well, and then there is this idea to make 1 virtual and 1 physical meeting per year in the future. I think this is very nice, a very nice suggestion. And then there is another question on how to register to become an IGAD member. And I think it's already answered by Françoise in the chat.
Yep. Thank you for all of that. I think the key thing to note about joining IGAD is that you need to first register for the Research Data Alliance website, and then you can join the interest group. And we encourage you to join other interest groups as well. And essentially what you will be doing is signing up for mailing lists, and you can control how those messages get to you. And then once you're a member, you can participate in discussion online, and you'll be getting the announcements of events like this. And we can talk further about other benefits of joining the group.
Yeah. Thanks, Cindy. I think we can move on now to Françoise. She's going to talk a little bit about this proposal of communities of practice within RDA, and with a special focus on the IGAD experience. Right, Françoise?
Thank you very much. So, Françoise Genova here. I am not at all from your domain. I am an astronomer, but I have been following the activities of IGAD even before it was created in the RDA. So IGAD has always been at the agriculture community has been really at the forefront in the RDA, and it has had one of the very first interest groups, which is the IGAD group we are discussing now, and which has organized this nice set of meetings. So the RDA was created in March 2013, and the Agriculture Data Interest Group, IGAD, was created also in 2013. They were people from the FAO, there were people from INRA in France who attended the first meeting, and it seems that the community understood the interest to join the RDA and to use it as a forum for discussion. So IGAD has been extremely active, as you have seen, with a long list of meetings during the plenaries. But there has been also working groups, as Cynthia was explaining, and working groups producing recommendations, which are now recommendations of the RDA. And the recommendation from the semantics group is being examined, but it had a request for comments, and I think it's okay, and things are going on with that recommendation too. So this means that IGAD has now a long life in the RDA, nearly as long as RDA life itself. And there has been a discussion about trying to understand what happens with groups which are really mature, which have been working hard for years, and what can happen then. So this is where the notion of, where is my slides? Community of practice showed up. So I stole the slides from the Secretary General of the RDA, Hilary Anao, who is fully involved in the discussion about the setting up of these communities of practices. So I am not completely sure all of us are familiar with what happens in VRDA and what kinds of groups VRDA has. So just a short reminder, we have groups which are called bird of a feather, which are really more linked to having a meeting in one of the plenaries to discuss a new subject. So these groups are temporary, but they play a very important role. There is more than 100 groups who are set up to deal with different subjects in the RDA, and the BOF allows you to meet other people interested in a subject which interests you, even if you don't know them, and to create a community, an international community of interest. Then we have the interest groups, which have a life on the long and medium and long term, like IGAD, to tackle a subject for a while. And the working groups have a short life, and they are here for 18 months to prepare recommendations, which will become RDA recommendations if the call for comments and the evaluation is okay. I mean, if they are implementable and implemented. So the idea is to create a new type of group, and which is this community of practice. In this case, it is to recognize the extreme importance of domains, the involvement of people from domains to discuss how to share their data, because they have their own needs. They know the data, they know the kind of metadata you have to attach to data, and they need places to discuss how to share their data. For the groups which do not have really another place to go, or for groups which would like to have a neutral place to discuss, the RDA is very good. And after a while, groups may want to do a bit more and to get a kind of recognition of their role from the RDA, and also to continue to bring the very important things they bring to the RDA, the hard work of the participants and the domain expertise, which is also to be shared with the other groups on technical topics or any other topics in the RDA. So what to do, what happened was to think, people began to think about creating a new kind of group in those cases. And the starting suggestions were to really to be groups, that these are groups which are around community of practices, as they are called, to represent the main discipline or domain stakeholders, which means institutions, associations, etc. Of course, the membership is the members of the RDA who decide to join the group, to have a group which gathers a critical mass of people, more than 100, which has a really international membership, the strength of the RDA. But in your case, you have other organizations which are really international. But one of the strengths of the RDA is that it's really international, and Egad has been a very first demonstration of that, with chairs, initial chairs were from different continents. And the idea here is to go beyond 3-4 countries, but to have at least a number of countries. The idea is to have a way to evidence the value of a community of practice. And the idea is also to have an idea that the group has been efficient to use the RDA mechanisms for its own needs, for the needs of its communities. And this is well measured if the domain had a working group created and a recommendation endorsed. So this list is only starting suggestions, and they are currently discussed. So just to tell you more, the calendar of what happened, there was a discussion at the beginning of the year, during the first quarter of the year, about the possibility to create a community of practice, and the discussion was triggered by discussion with Egad, between the Secretary General and Egad. So the proposal to assess how to create a new a new kind of group was proposed to the RDA Council, which is the place to discuss and to decide on these things in March. Then a task force was created. I will tell you in a minute who is in the task force. Then there is a place on the website for the group to discuss. And there is a work on a draft framework. There will be, there are contributions of the task force for the moment. And the idea is to be on a relatively fast track to ask the bodies of the RDA, the Technical Advisory Board, the Secretariat, and the Organizational Advisory Board to provide feedback so that there can be a community consultation and assessment feedback then things can be decided at the council level. So again, the task force began not so long ago. The idea is to have people dedicating time to discuss the context, the scope. At the beginning, it was the scope of the task force activities. Now it's the scope of a community of practice groups. The goals and deliverable of the task force, the timing I gave it to you, and to take the feedback into account when it will come. So the members of a group, we have a Secretary General, we have 2 people from the Secretariat, 3 members of the Technical Advisory Board, and the 3 chairs of IGAD. So the names are here. Hilary is the Secretary General. Bridget Walker is the assistant of the Secretary General in the Secretariat. You have the 3 two members of the Secretariat. You have also Stephanie Kethers, who is more knowledgeable about organization of the RDA. The 3 tab members are Dimitris Koureas, myself, and Rainer Stotska. Dimitris has been active on the representation of disciplines in the RDA. He is leading an interest group which is called Disciplinary Interoperability Frameworks, and of course the 3 chairs of IGAD. So I think that's all, and it's just here to have a few addresses. You have a mail for inquiries and a few things useful to know about the RDA. I put in the chat, and I was not the only one, information about how to join the RDA if you would like to join. So any questions or comments from the other people of the task force which are around the table this afternoon? Sorry, it may be the morning or the evening, sorry. We are a bit everywhere, I think.
Thank you, Françoise, thank you. I would just like to highlight that what we are doing here right now is sharing with the whole agricultural data community this idea of RDA, creating these communities of practice, and we have the chance of influencing how this will turn out to be, how this will be shaped in the future. So you are all welcome to bring questions so that we can improve this this framework. This is not decided yet. All the bound community, the scope of the community of practice, this is not at all finished. It's not a finished discussion. So if you have contributions, please send them to us. Any questions in the chat box? Or anyone would like to ask something? We can unmute them.
This is Cindy, and I just want to chime in that part of what we are working on as we develop this proposal further is what is the difference between an interest group and a community of practice. And we want to make sure that it's worthwhile to create this new kind of group. And we may or may not want to think about it as a progression so that an interest group can form and be the start of people coming together on a particular domain topic or technical topic. And then as it progresses to become a real international, highly expert group of people, then perhaps it becomes a community of practice. But it may be that we think about them, that we should be thinking about them as somewhat different. I think this is still open for questions. But one of the things that I would like to point out is that I'm involved in a couple of other communities of practice through my work. And I think one of the great benefits of having a community of practice within the RDA structure is that we have support from the RDA Secretariat to organize physical meetings in association with the rest of RDA. We have the opportunity to foster interaction between our group and the other groups within RDA. And so it is one of our challenges in Egad to not only bring the agricultural data community together, but to try to benefit from those conversations that we can promote with other interest groups and working groups within RDA. So I really like the idea of having RDA as an umbrella that includes communities of practice, particularly for domains like agriculture, where there's lots of different technical topics that we're all interested in, but what we share is the application of those concepts to our work in agriculture. I'm not as sure about whether communities of practice should be defined from a more technical standpoint rather than a domain standpoint, but I can say that for this domain, we think it's a good idea.
Maybe, I think, Cynthia, if I can add some things, because there are questions coming here. I think that there is a question about what is different, what is the difference between IGAD and the RDA. So IGAD is one of the interest groups of the RDA. So this is why to become a member of IGAD, you join the RDA first, and you can then join the IGAD and any other group of the RDA. So there is also a question, what would be different if IGAD becomes a community of practice? I think you answered, you gave an already detailed answer, Cynthia. I also think that one of the feelings we have about it, or at least I have about it, is that it gives a stronger representation of the agriculture community in the RDA, because it's a recognition of a real engagement and success and long-term commitment. And it's also a way to show up outside of the RDA as the RDA agriculture community. So it is how I feel it at this stage.
Thank you, Cindy. Any more questions, comments from the audience? Well, David just posted the question about the presentations. Well, it takes a little while to upload them to F1000 Research, but we will let you know through the RDA mailing list. Okay, so maybe we can move on to the next topic. To do that, I would like to invite Medha Devare from CGIAR. She's going to present a draft framework for a new working group associated to Egad, which is the Crop Data Interoperability Working Group. Medha, with you now.
Yeah, hi everyone. I am trying to share my screen and having a little bit, can you see my screen now, hopefully?
Yes, yes, perfectly.
Okay, great. So a few weeks ago, several weeks ago, Ima and Patricia and Cindy met with me and broached the subject of this crop interoperability group, modeled on the work that the wheat data interoperability group has done. That was seen as a pretty successful exercise. And so we thought that there was a need for this. So I thought I would frame, before I sort of launched into the operational framework, some of these slides some of you may have seen before, but I've added a few now. I thought I would just ground the whole discussion on why we even talking about this group. What is the reason for it? So one of the key issues is that standards have proliferated. And so there are often bespoke ontologies, for instance, to help describe concepts related to different crops. For instance, again, that's just one instance of the issue. And so you often have term duplication or very similar terms that exist in different ontologies that kind of refer to the same parent concept. But because of the needs of the domain experts who are using that ontology, the term is labeled differently. And so I've given an example here, which actually has already been addressed. The spike in wheat, the rice and the panicle in rice, the year in corn, they're all inflorescences, but they're labeled differently. And when you actually go to build a tool that might use ontologies that is based on ontology, like a data collection tool, for instance, or want to label your data in a certain way, you may actually need to call it a spike, a panicle, or a year, but you may actually also want to refer to the higher level class, which is inflorescence. That's just one example of what the problem is. There are many others, but I wanted to give a sort of a clear example so you could grapple with it. So really the existence of multiple terms to describe similar concepts might, not in all cases, but might actually defeat the purpose of these standards, or minimize their impact, or make it very difficult for data managers and researchers and others who are working with the data to figure out, how to describe data variables in a way that makes it possible to enable interoperation, cross-mapping. So the actual interoperability across the standards themselves seems to be a key requirement for researchers going forward in the agricultural sector. So when we talk about making data more interoperable, more fair, that might be a key requirement that we need to sort of put in place, the mapping across these related terms that would then allow for easier aggregation and semantically driven reuse of the data sets. That's where this is really coming from. So what will this effort really result in? What do we expect from it? There are four key things, and there may be more. This is just off the top of my head, and as we move forward with this effort, this is likely to change, because the idea is to bring more community engagement into this effort, but to not present everybody with a blank slate. So that's why I've tried to strike a balance between developing some stuff and then involving others to take this forward. So what is this expected to result in? One is effort to improve cross-mapping of interoperability standards pertaining to crop data through wider engagement with the community, as I mentioned. We hope that through this effort, we can also promote more adoption, wider adoption of these enhanced standards and the better annotation of crop data, really. So easier discovery of and access to these data as part of the fallout from it. And the improved ability to aggregate the data and apply big data tools and technologies, machine learning tools to them through more consistent use of standards that are now mapped well across related concepts. So what is the sort of the envisioned way of doing this? And so I had presented a few weeks back at an organizational meeting a kind of a high-level operational framework, and I've done a little bit more work on it. So one of the first steps would be to identify known key stakeholders and potential group members. I've sort of done that with input from Ima and Cindy and Patricia to this, who might be some initial contacts. I mean, this group is only going to grow. So we've started a list. And some of you who are present are on that list, others are not, and I will be sending out emails shortly to invite you as initial participants. And so the idea is to span organizations and sectors. You can see some of the list here, some of the examples here from both the public and private sector. The thought was to ask for some initial sort of volunteers, heavy lifters we call them, from a cross section of these organizations who are willing to work together to do, as the name implies, some heavy lifting, which means to actually dive in and produce some content, perhaps to revise the draft framework, to add to it. And to perhaps develop a survey. So some of the more content heavy work that's involved in this is what we envision this group to be doing. And then the products that this heavy lifters group develops will be validated by the wider group of participants, the key stakeholders that are not part of that heavy lifters group. The outputs from this group will hopefully result in a paper that and will include a rationale, problem statement, methodology, findings, recommendations, summary guidelines, and many of these pieces will exist as separate items, perhaps separate resources for people to go to from the IGAD website or this new community of practice website, depending on how things go. We also want to consider how impact might be measured, because a lot of these things, are one-offs. You do this and then it's done, and there's no indication of whether that piece of work has had impact, whether it might be revisited, modified slightly, what that impact might be and how you measure it. So I sort of propose that might be something we want to dive into a little bit more as well. So the key tasks for the lead, with input from the heavy lifters perhaps, and let me minimize my Zoom thing, which is interfering in what I see, is articulation of needs and gaps in a problem statement, along with an identification of key milestones, associated deliverables, and time frame. So this work I have already done, and I can hopefully click on that, but I think I'm going to have to stop sharing my screen and share this new screen. So let me try and do that. You should be now able
I think we could see it, Medha.
Oh, really?
We were able to see it, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, now I don't know. I've lost my place, but so hopefully you can see this. And what I want to focus on is the key milestones, activities, and time frame. I don't want to go through a blow-by-blow account of all of these, but just to let you know that this has been sort of fleshed out a little bit. With the the key pieces being the community agreement on scope of work and the approach of the group, the development of a survey as part of that, and then the administration of the survey. So as part of the administration of the survey, of course, you have to agree on a tool and develop the survey, etc. So that's part of it. And then based on what the survey says, develop a set of recommendations and share that with the group and have it validated by the group, and then present the methodology, sort of the outputs from the survey, and the recommendations, ideally at the RDA plenary in 2021. So that's a very broad view of what this might look like. And I'm going to go back now to my presentation. Whoops, I keep doing this. Which you should be able to see here again. So let me know if you can't see that presentation. But I just wanted to give you a flavor of the milestones and the associated deliverables. So hopefully there will be more tweaking of that, more work on it as we start to build the momentum with a broader group. Right now it's just been out of my head. Right. So the draft plan of work and key contacts to fill the gaps, as I mentioned, this will be a living document. And by that, I mean that it will change as the group becomes more involved and people start investing more in this. Gathering relevant learnings and materials known to the group. That will happen once the group is set up. So everything in green is stuff that's already been done to some degree, to one degree or another. I've started in on that. Gathering the relevant learnings and materials, that'll come as we engage the group more, of course. And this is, again, tasks that I envision will be primarily led by that heavy lifters group, the first responders, if you will. And then some others, drafting, validating, testing, and conducting the survey, and that will focus more on a landscape analysis. So the idea is what's out there, what's going on already in terms of approaches and standards towards enabling crop data interoperability. The work done with the wheat data interoperability and the rice data interoperability will form some of the basis for this, I'm envisioning. Analyzing the survey results, sharing that back with the respondents and the group members. And then, of course, as I mentioned, drafting recommendations and operational guidelines. Ideally, this would include some resources, tools, and ways to incentivize and facilitate adoption of the standards themselves. And also, you know, sensitizing folks to what's already out there, what's already been done, where can you go for those resources. Validating all of this work with the wider group, not just the heavy lifters, refining based on the feedback of the group, and then sharing the final recommendations and guidelines with group members and posting to the RDA, the appropriate RDA website is for wider, you know, wider availability. So I think that's pretty much. Oh no, I had one more slide, I think. Nope, that's pretty much it. So if there are questions, I'm happy to take them. But that's pretty much all I had to say for now. And then we'll go forward with, you know, with contacting the group members that we already have, and moving forward with, you know, others that they might know in terms of, you know, how to sensitize, how to move this forward.
Thanks, Medha. Do we have questions from the participants? Well, there is a comment by Hannington. Medha, can you see there? About the milestones and tasks.
Right.
I think you showed something about it.
Yeah, can you share the document again? Maybe you can show that part. That would be helpful.
The document. So yeah, okay, hold on one second. So hopefully you can see this now. Can you see the document?
Yes.
Okay. Let me turn off my video. Okay,
And in case, yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I'm having trouble managing all my screens here. Could somebody tell me what the question is?
It was just to share the milestones and tasks. And so I think what you're showing here is what you're envisioning as the tasks in each broad group.
Yes.
And when we expect to do them.
Yes.
So
and as I said, this is likely to change because, you know, this is just, as I said, just me, but this is intended to be a community effort. So we're just in the early stages now of gathering. You know, we have some initial contacts. We will be contacting them soon. I will be contacting them with the involvement of Ima, Cindy, and Patricia. And with that initial group of heavy lifters, we'll be taking this forward. The first task for the heavy lifters will be to look at this scope of work, in fact, and see if it meets the needs, if the problem statement is appropriate, if there's stuff to tweak or add or take away from it, and then move forward based on that and refine the milestones based on that. So does that answer your question?
Okay, yes. Medha, then I think that maybe people from the audience, they might have an interest in contributing to this group, to this new working group, or maybe they could help out with the identification of stakeholders, yeah, the heavy lifters you said. So please, anyone with good ideas and good contacts, please.
Yes, and I see that Marie-Angélique has already added a bunch of stuff, and we've already got those on the list. So thanks, Marie, and you're on the list too, by the way. So.
So Medha, could you talk about who you think, you know, what, so these are some examples: Plantiome, Ag Biodata, and Ontology, community of practice of big data. These are examples. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of person you are hoping to engage in this
Yeah,
work?
since
Just
this
so
is
that,
about crop data interoperability, these would be folks who are actually working with, to some degree, I think it's important to involve people who are working with crop data, who may not necessarily be ontology folks, but I would imagine that the group would be to, you know, the heavy involvement would be the people who are kind of steeped in the ontology work themselves. So these projects that Marie brought up are, you know, people who are already working on this issue of enabling that interoperability. So it's good to start with what's already done and where the gaps still exist and how we fill those gaps, the recommendations for filling those gaps. And I think that requires the view of the work, the heavy lifting from primarily those working with the ontologies and those working to enable the interoperability, but with consultation that involves data managers and researchers who are grappling, you know, from the user end, the user perspective as well.
So these could be tool builders who are using or developing ontologies, or I would say perhaps any kind of crop data standards, whether they're ontologies or not, and who are engaged with their own stakeholders, but want to be in communication with other people who have been doing similar work.
Sure, and I think that's what that brings to mind to me is sort of a statement. You know, when these emails go out, for instance, as to the kind of person or persons, you know, the sort of the group, the group skills or the expertise, the expertises that we want, that we feel might be most helpful.
So I'm going to call out Cheryl Porter's name, and she doesn't have
She's
to
already
speak
on the list. Yes. I've already, yeah.
So just for other folks on the call, Cheryl has been involved in the AgMIP efforts, crop modelers who have been doing a lot of data interoperability work, and she may have interacted with some of you others on the call. So it's that kind of effort that has already been going on, and now we want to bring it all together with other people doing similar work.
So, you know, the AgMIP project is a case in point there. I mean, they've done really valuable work in enabling this kind of interoperability, and they've already done a fair bit of mapping across standards. So I think, you know, there we get both the tool sort of development and one approach and the researcher point of view. I think we also get that when we involve the Plantiome project, and in fact, also the Ag Bio folks. So, you know, I take your point. I mean, I think it's really important to have that broad representation, and it'll be important for me when I send out these emails to sort of draft that more clearly. I think there's a comment here about adding a working group case statement submission in the timeline. So I thought I had that, but perhaps not. If not, I will rectify that. Absolutely. Thanks, Françoise. Then there's a question from Richard. I keep moving this thing. Is the focus on ontology development to support interoperability, or more widely for data management activities to support all aspects of FAIR for ag data? So this particular group is more to support interoperability across crop data. So, you know, looking at the crop data standards out there and figuring out, you know, what whether there is, there's already some siloing happening, whether there's, how can we map across those efforts to make things more streamlined for those who want a higher level view and not a very, very crop specific view to describe data. Does that answer your question, Richard? And you're also on that list. So you can also determine the direction this takes.
To add on to your answer, Medha, I think we want to keep the scope fairly focused on the interoperability piece, because otherwise it becomes a discussion about everything. And we have other discussions in Egad about things like data management planning in general, or metadata, or catalogs, or capacity building. So there's lots of other things about data management that we will not expect this particular working group to tackle. And Cheryl Porter had raised her hand and I unmuted her. So Cheryl may want to weigh in.
Okay, hi everybody. It's good to see this going forward and I'm happy to be part of it. I do have, I'm maybe a little bit too impatient natured, and we're already doing a lot to implement data interoperability standards, although what I'm focused on is fairly narrow, I admit. But I wouldn't want to see those efforts hampered by going, so I think we need parallel tracks. One, we need this track that I think Medha was describing very well, where we build a community and get consensus and work on all these, try to coordinate all these working parts. But at the same time, I don't want to hamper efforts that are already ongoing. At the forefront of my mind as I was writing an email this morning to Medha saying, hey, we really need to get together the BRAPI group with Guardian and with the Ag Data Commons group, because we have common interests and we need to further our data interoperability work. So that's my main comment, is that we need to move forward with what we're already doing, at the same time have a parallel track of bringing in a broader community. That was it.
Okay. I think someone else raised their hands. Françoise? No, I might be mistaken. Any more questions?
Medha, you're now unmuted.
Thank you. I thought maybe that was by design.
That was not on purpose.
No, I just wanted to follow up on Cheryl and say absolutely. I mean, here. It's not that we're. I think I would hope that this effort would only sort of be a clearinghouse almost for all the efforts that are out there, and figure out what is missing and where does effort need to be placed to get to that holy grail, that I think we're all after in terms of, related to enabling full interoperability. So that's the idea, and I think the survey will help. For many of us, I think we already know what's out there, but we may still be surprised. And so that's the idea behind the survey, and identifying what the needs are, getting some of the more user perspective into what we're doing. Not to say that we're not already doing that. Absolutely we are. And I think you, of all people, Cheryl, through AgMIP, are very much connected with the users and their needs. And the tools that you've developed respond to them. But I think it still helps keep us real, and it will be a useful exercise to do that. So I completely agree with you. That's a long-winded way of saying yes.
Okay.
So maybe I can say a word with my tab hat.
Yes.
For the people who don't know the RDA well, the Technical Advisory Board is examining and evaluating the proposals for new groups. So if I can say one or two words about what my feeling now, I completely agree with the answer to the question, which is, and the core of it is that the working group has only 18 months, as you know very well, because you did a detailed timeline. And seen from where I am, I don't know the topic. I feel it's an ambitious aim, but it's really worth. And the fact that you want to engage people who are really knowledgeable, I think it's a good way to be able to do it. So I feel, you know, seen from outside again, I think it's very ambitious for 18 months, but if you really are able to engage the right people, it's likely doable and it will be really worth.
Well, Françoise, thank you. We will keep that in mind. And just to put some context on this, perhaps I'm extremely optimistic, but in the earlier timeline, before Ima pointed out that, you know, that we would have 18 months, I had us delivering sort of a finished product in November of this year. So there you go.
I mean, I think that, as Cheryl points out, there's already been lots of work on this. So yeah, it's not as if we're starting from zero. That the challenge is just to make sure that we know the landscape, that we identify any remaining gaps, that we provide the recommendations so that people know how to navigate that landscape, and if there are gaps, what the plans are to fill those gaps. So, and that's a very generic answer. I'm not a crop data expert myself, so more like Françoise, I think it's really a matter of trying to make sure that the progress that's already been made gets solidified and promoted and put into practice with the guidance of all the relevant experts.
Thank you. Any more questions, guys? Well, if we don't have any more questions from the audience, then I think I'm gonna thank Medha for the nice
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you to all of you. And stay tuned to hear more about this. Thanks.
Well, we have a new hand raised.
Oops.
Let me try to unmute. Oh gosh. Oh,
hello.
Okay. Yes, you can talk.
Medha, ma'am.
Yes.
Can you hear me, ma'am?
Yes, I can.
Ma'am, very nicely you have explained all the information. Nicely presented. But ma'am, I'm having one question, that you are from India, that I have asked the question, you have not answered it.
Yes, I am.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we covered the agenda very well. Now, if any of you have a new issue, a different topic to bring to the table, please do it. We still have a few minutes. Or maybe we could go back. Ima, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, so maybe we could spend the last few minutes just discussing how we plan to move forward now with IGAD and with all these meetings. It seems that many people liked this style of meeting online. Do you have any thoughts to share about that for the future, Ima?
Well, I like very much the proposal from Karsten. I mean, I think that the combination between face-to-face and virtual could work, because eventually we need to meet and we need to have face-to-face events to have more informal contacts, and it's very useful. So the point then is to decide to what plenaries we go. So we could make a combination. I think the next one, Françoise, is in Europe or is in Costa Rica. I think that in November there is Costa Rica, and then the next one is in Scotland, in Edinburgh. So yeah, we could always look at what is more feasible for the community, because it seems like it's easier for people in Asia to come to Europe rather than going to the United States or Central America. I don't know, we would need to look at it very more carefully, but we can put it in the survey as well. We didn't put this. We could ask what is the combination that the people would prefer, particularly from November on.
Yes. There is a question from Richard. If we know whether the next plenary in maybe Costa Rica, right? If it's gonna be virtual or not. I don't know if Françoise knows that.
No. I don't know. Can you?
Well, she
unmute? No.
through the chat.
Right.
Well,
Okay, so now I can speak. There is, of course, work ongoing to understand how to organize the next plenary. What I can say is that the virtual plenary has been really a success, with more than 900 people participating really to the sessions, I mean, and many people registered all in all. So I think it's there is a discussion about what will go on in Costa Rica. I hope they will announce something soon, but for the moment, to my knowledge, there is no decision taken. But of course, the fact that to have a virtual component, the value of a virtual component is well understood after what happened with the Melbourne plenary, which became virtual.
okay.
Yeah, here probably Cindy wants to add something as well about the fact that in Helsinki last year, we already got kind of proposal from those that attended the plenary saying that in many cases people cannot not afford to join the plenary so easily. So they asked us whether we could do something like interim meetings between plenaries to facilitate the attendance of more people from either Americas or Europe, Asia, and Africa. It happened eventually that we proposed to have a combination of annual meetings either in Washington or in Rome, but suddenly the COVID-19 showed up, and therefore we decided to mobilize our resources and any effort in organizing this virtual meeting instead. But there was already an ongoing discussion, let's say, in Helsinki about the community moving to something that would become a little bit less committed in terms of costs and funding for and to facilitate the attendance of more people to these meetings. I don't know, Cindy, if you want to add something to this.
No, I think the only thing that I have also been wondering and could use some feedback on is in the past, we have tried to have a little bit of remote participation in our plenary meetings, but I don't know if it's been as successful as this entirely virtual meeting. I mean, the nice thing about this kind of meeting is that everybody has closer to the even playing field because everybody is remote, and it's a little harder, I think, to have a combination of remote plus physical, partly because of the time zone challenges, but also it's always hard to engage everybody who's not in the room at the same level as those who are in the room. So I think we do need to get a good balance between, either all virtual or all physical, and try to do both.
Yeah,
I want to point out also, somebody in the chat has asked about certificates of presentation, and we had gotten some inquiries about this in the lead up to this week, and we have now gotten a template from RDA that we can use to provide certificates of participation. So please contact us offline about that, and we'll do our best to provide those. I don't think we'll provide them to everybody automatically. There's too many people who have participated, and most people don't need that. So if you could just contact us offline, we'll provide you with that certificate.
Okay, do we have any more comments here?
Yeah, we've had a couple of suggestions in the comment about topics that we could cover, including things like data quality and health related. So I think both of those would fall under EGAD topic areas, and we could consider a special call for presentations or discussion on those topics.
Yeah. Well, there is something that we didn't mention yet. We did receive many more submissions than we could accept this time. So we would like to let you know the people who submitted and who didn't have their work approved for presentation this time. We would like you to know that next time we want to make sure you will be able to present and share your work with everyone. But surely we had many more presentations this time than we usually have at the pre-meetings, for example. They are much shorter. Yes, there is another question from David. He asks if there are specific roles and responsibilities for civil society activists or their organizations. Cynthia asked him to specify, explain a bit more. But I think we could say that there is no kind of restriction for participation of civil society in RDA or IGAD. And RDA is very open to participation from people in all sectors. So I don't know if this is your case, David, but please feel free to join in the RDA if you haven't done this yet. And let's start talking. Actually, this is a message that we would like to send to all the audience. The people who are not members of RDA, please join in and please watch out the EGAD website for news regarding all the presentations in this week, during this week, and future events as well. And if we don't have any more questions, yeah, let's start talking. Yeah, if we don't have any more questions, I would like to thank everyone for their participation in all the sessions in this week's event. I would like to thank especially all the people who presented their work, their good work. Yeah, any final words, Ima?
I think that Medha wants to say something, but I cannot unmute her for any reason.
Let me try here.
I tried as well and I can't.
Medha, you're unmuted now. I think we were both trying to unmute at the same time.
Okay, great. Now I just wanted to jump in to I guess it was David Joseph Aliou, his comment about civil society activists or their organizations. And the reason I find that interesting is because, you know, we are moving agriculture to a very digital sort of space, and data is very much, you know, a treasure. I mean, it is, it's everywhere, and it needs to be handled responsibly. It needs to be handled ethically. Increasingly, as we're talking about digital agriculture, transformation of the agricultural space, we're going to be running up against issues of ethics and responsible management and you know, all sorts of other things in terms of also the solutions we build and the tools we build. And so it is an interesting point that he makes about not just civil society activists, but also farmers organizations and other groups like that, who are intended to be sort of the ultimate, if you will, in quotes, beneficiaries of the work that we do quite far downstream. So it would be interesting to see if there are ways of engaging more formally with these groups as we go forward. I don't have answers to that, but I can see that, you know, that could be of value for and a win-win really across sectors or across the kind of groups, the stakeholder groups. Thanks.
And as a follow-on to that, Medha, thank you for recognizing the direction of that question. I do want to put a shout out to another virtual workshop that is happening on June 24th on the topic of agricultural data ownership and privacy. And so we have a number of speakers lined up who will be, particularly from the research and development community, thinking about some of these more ethical and legal issues about research data. And I will find a link and drop it into the chat, but I encourage everybody to register for that. It was originally going to be a face-to-face meeting that we thought we would have only 50 people for, and I think we already have more than 150 people registered. So this is a big benefit of having virtual meetings. You can have global participation to things that otherwise you wouldn't be able to do.
All right. Emma, do you want to say some final words?
No, just that has been a very nice and exciting experience this week. Personally, have learned a lot about what's going on in many of your organizations. Has been really interesting. And yeah, so I would really simply say that please fill the survey, because we really need to understand how to move forward. And it would be very important that we get this feedback as early as possible. Definitely, I think I'm going to attend these workshops, and it seems to be quite interesting. And nothing, I think that we can keep in touch. Let's meet virtually again. Yes. Remember that we are organizing these webinars. We don't have any in the pipeline, but if you really want to share with the community, with the interest group at the moment, your work, you should remember that there is always this opportunity to request us to have this webinar, and we organize it for you, and we can share it with all the people that are subscribed to RDA and Egad. So nothing else, Patricia.
Okay, so thank you guys. Thanks everyone for their very rich participation in this virtual event. We are very, very happy with the result, with how it worked out. Thank you. Have a nice evening or afternoon, I don't know, everyone. This is a very global example of a global community, right? Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.